So we were talking yesterday about that this might be the last generation in which there's social skills. And I was thinking about it.
The last generation.
It was. Well, they're definitely not like they used to be already. They've already. So I was thinking about an analogy, what it's like, and I thought, see, what do you think about this? It's the same thing that what happened to strength. It used to be, we talked a little bit about it yesterday, but the analogy would be that in the past people were just strong. They lifted things all day long and they used their brawn to do things, right? That's an English word, isn't it? Brawn?
Muscles.
Yeah.
B-R-A-W.
Now they go to a gym. So what's the idea of the gym? The gym is that we have this human capacity to develop a physique, to be healthy, to be strong. More not healthy. I'm looking more at the muscle gym, the type of where you do repetitions and things like that. Not when you're doing aerobics, you're lifting weights. So even the need for that, to do that in a special environment that you go to. So it indicates that it's not out there, that you can't get it anymore outside. So in the same way, in the future there will be sort of cafes where you go to meet people. Because most of the day you don't meet people.
Yeah, internet cafe.
Well, the opposite of an internet cafe. An internet cafe is where you go to get on the internet. But now the reality is exactly the opposite. Most of the time you're on the internet, and then you need to go out to meet people.
Right.
So there will be these cafes which are like gyms, but gyms for the social muscle in our brains. Right? That you need to have social interactions.
Yeah, we can look at it anyway. From people years ago yearned for half a day's holiday once a year. They never took a break. Nowadays, people have so much free time; they don't know what to do with themselves. And so you have all these leisure activities designed, to
fill their time. Yeah, so there's already something like that. I mean, there always used to be, after hours, people would go to, after work hours, they would go to, in England, a pub, or in America, into a...
That's recently, but
no,
200 years ago, as it was dark, people went to bed.
So most people, but some people went out to hang out. In America, it's very common, after work, to go have a drink in a bar. In America, they call it bar. In England, they call it pub. And there was a social environment there, which was very important. So that will continue in some way or other. But people will make that into a gym, meaning there will be like, it'll be so popular, they won't even need to. Maybe they will just get a subscription or something like that. Okay, anyway, that's the idea. So the fact that Hashem is the master of wonders, that's the ratzon, that's the run in the psyche. Ach im ratz libcha shuv le'echad. Right, we're at the bottom of the right hand column. Ach im ratz libcha shuv le'echad. But if your heart is run, return to the one. What is this one? Right, this is in Sefer Yetzirah. There's 3 different variants to the text there, and they're all right. Usually, when a variant was preserved, a variant in the reading, if it was preserved, it meant that it made sense. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been preserved; it would have thrown it out. לפי שהוא יתברך בעצמו אדון נפלאות ועושה פלא, ואינו בכלל השגת הנפש ודבקותה, ולכך הוא בבחינת שוב. Because he himself, who's this one? The one is Hashem. So if your heart is running, where is it running? It's running into your life force. The Alter Rebbe's picture of run and return is the opposite from most people's. It's not that he doesn't have the regular picture. The regular picture of run and return is that you run out of yourself. Yeah. You run out of yourself to Hashem. And the return is that you return to yourself. So people looked at it like it's a unia mystica. It's like that's what it's called in Latin. That you unify with the transcendent. And then you come back to yourself. So that's like how Rabbi Akiva in the Pardes is described, that they went into the Pardes. So they ran into the Pardes, and Rabbi Akiva knew how to come out. What? No, went in peace and came out in peace. So the going in to the mystical place is called the run, and coming out of it is the return. But by the Alter Rebbe, there's also the opposite motion, which is that running is feeling, it's called feeling the infinite life force inside of you. It's not going outside of yourself, it's actually coming more into yourself. Meaning that the stress that he said before is that the run is to feel the life force. But then, if you've gone too far, you feel the life force too much. Meaning you're feeling, in a sense, yourself, but it's through yourself. You're feeling it through yourself. Then you have to go back to the one. Who's the one? The one is Hashem, who's beyond the life force that He's giving you. Okay? So even though this is the heart of meditation, in a certain sense, is like learning Torah. That you go into the sugya, you go into the issue, you analyze it very, very strongly. But you could lose sight of the fact that this whole issue was raised by the fact that God gave Torah. That without the way that the Torah would have stated the issue, you wouldn't have been able to go so deeply into it. It's not philosophy, it's real considerations. And so you lose sight of the Noten Torah, of the one who gives the Torah. So that's called returning to the one by the Alter Rebbe. So every once in a while, we'll talk about this, they used to stop. And he says, we saw this a few times in different Maimarim, that he says, you need to stop your learning and recall that all of this is Torah Hashem. This is all the Torah of God. And it's not just your deliberations about the world. V'zeu norat ilot Adon Niflot. And that's what it means, that he is
master.
Difficult to praise. He's terrible to praise. And he's the master of wonders. Norat ilot oseh fele. And he's difficult or terrible to praise and does wonders. Ki lefishu Adon Niflot, because he does wonders, because he's the master of wonders and does wonders. That's why he's so terrible to praise. We are in awe of even praising him. He's so high. What would I say? I have no words. But thanks to learning Torah and keeping mitzvos, so the soul can then cling to what we define as beyond the real one, that's beyond my life force, that's beyond the specific way in which I encounter Hashem. And then he's called the master of wonders. Because Torah and mitzvos at their core, as mitzvos, here he's not talking about learning Torah, he's talking about esek Torah. Esek means that you're just even moving a book from moving pages in a book. Even doing that is esek Torah.
Even involved.
Yeah, being involved in Torah. Anything that has even writing a Sefer Torah, which is not you're learning as you're writing it, but it's not really learning it. What you're doing more is you're involved in Torah, like you say. So that is the mitzvah aspect. That's the commandment aspect of the Torah. So I'm not learning it. I'm not opening. I don't care if it's open or closed in a sense. It could be closed. But what I'm interested in is how the Torah now is a mitzvah. It's a commandment from God for me to be involved in it. And of course, all the other mitzvahs, as such, they all come from the Sobeb. They all come from the light that surrounds everything. Again, because it's a makif, because it's not as I understand it, but rather how it is transcendentally. And that's why there had to be a kriyas yamsuf before giving the Torah. There had to be a state in which the sea became dry earth. Why? Because there has to be a transcendence going above the differences in the different parts of creation. You have to see that somehow everything merges into one. To receive the Torah, to receive a mitzvah, you have to ascend to the Sovev. You have to ascend to the light that's above. What does it mean that you ascend? Sorry, I keep saying that. What does it mean in the psyche that you ascend to a state that's above everything? It's a state in which everything merges. So the wet part of it.
But it's not a merging, it's a change.
It's a switch. You see that they can switch. So they're merging. By the way, this happens every single time. Every single time you're about to reveal some higher aspect of godliness, there's a Kriyas Yamsuf. What's the example? The example is that it says that, for instance, to get married is as hard as Kriyas Yamsuf. Why is it as hard as Kriyas Yamsuf? Because getting married is a merging of the male and the masculine and the feminine. Just like here, there was a merging of the sea with the dry land. They can somehow what else is like that? Parnasa. Parnasa is like that also. Why? Because what is Hashem doing? He's merging the spiritual sustenance with physical sustenance. He's transforming something that was spiritual into something that became physical that you have. Or he's putting two people together. Parnasa is a lot of times. You have to have two people for there to be parnasa. So that's also an example of things coming together. Kriyas Yamsuf, the parting of the Red Sea, is a state in which the transcendent is revealed. And that has to come before receiving the Torah. So when a person gets married, it's like Yamsuf. It's like the parting of the Red Sea, because these two things are now merging, the masculine and the feminine. The result is that what appears, what's the new thing that comes down? The Shekhinah. The divine presence comes between them. There's a new instance of the divine presence in the world, now that there is a couple. And the same thing is also true of it's interesting that we don't see this, but it's also true that when two people are learning, it's also a type of Kriyas Yamsuf. That's why it's so hard to be on time.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were late to Kriyas Yamsuf also. They almost missed it. Right? They came a little late. Because it's customary to come a little late to the party.
They came late for Matan Torah.
That too. That's because they already knew that it was a custom. Maybe Yamsuf they didn't know.
All night davening.
Okay. They weren't up all night davening. They were sleeping.
No,
We stayed up all night. Moshe had to wake them up.
That's for the Torah.
Yeah, that's what you said, for the Torah.
No,
for the Yamsuf. No, they were a few days late. They were supposed to be there after 3 days, and they only came after 7. So a few days late. In any case, it's hard to get to Yamsuf. It's a difficult thing. So when two people learn, it's the same thing. Because what's happening when two people learn? So the Shekhinah comes down to be between them. And it says that even if one person is by himself, so the Shekhinah is also present. But there the Shekhinah is present hovering above. But the moment that you get two people, all the more so, really when it happens is when you have 10 people learning together, then the Shekhinah is between them. It's not above them. Okay?
When Nachshon ben Aminadab went into the water, he didn't split till he got to his nose.
Mm-hmm.
But he was extremely tall. Very, 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 very tall. So all of the people who went into the water after him were drowned because he was much taller than them. So in order for them to cross the Yom Suf, he had to bend down, to kofif, to bring his nose lower, to make the water split lower down. So you want to give something to someone, even when it's learning,
stoop down.
One person has to bend down a little bit to give to the other.
שהים הוא בחינת המדעית קסיה. He transformed the yam into yabasha. He transformed the conceal it, and they can't be seen. שבחינת המדעית קסיה בא לידי גילוי בחינת המדעית גלי כדי להיות גילוי המשכת התורה במתן תורה. So what happened here spiritually is that the concealed world
things needed the water to live.
Right.
So you didn't see them.
No, everything was revealed.
So where were they then?
What?
On the dry land?
No, we're not talking about the land and the bottom, the ocean floor was revealed. Not that all the animals were revealed. No, they went with the waters. They moved with the waters. Which is saying that the ocean, the sea represents in the spirituality, it represents a concealed world. In other words, it's the world of the Keter, of the crown. And the superconscious part of our existence. And the dry land represents our conscious existence. And these two had to merge. They had to even switch themselves. So the crown had to be revealed. Both of those. The crown had to be revealed. If the crown would not have been revealed, that's not the beginning of Matan Torah, because it wasn't Matan Torah. Matan Torah, the beginning of the Torah is that the crown is now revealed. That God gave from above. הנה צירופי האותיות נקראו בשם סוסים על דרך משל, אבל זה נאמר סוס ורוכבו רמה בהם כמו שהתברר, מפני שהסוס, הגם שהוא תפל לרוכבו, על כל זה יש בו מעלה את הראש, שיכול לרוץ להוליך את הרוכב למקום שלא היה רוכב ויכול להגיע לשם בלי סוס. כן, I'm just reading the whole thing so I remember what he says, כך כל צירופי אותיות התורה יש בהם יתרון מעלה זו, שבדבקות נפש האדם בצירופי אותיות, אף שאינו יודע ומבין העניין בין השכל, רק שהוגע ומדבר בהם, נפוק הרהור דלאו כדיבור דמי, הרי הם מעלים את הנפש למקום שלא הייתה הנפש מגעת שם מצד שורשה. So he says, what does it mean, the image that he took the chariots, and especially the horses of Egypt. Egypt is always known for its horses. The prohibition, the king is not allowed to have too many horses. The technical reason is because in those times, having many horses meant you had a standing army. And a standing army for a Jewish king is currently forbidden. Why? Because an army should be used only when the need arises. When you create, like in many, people don't get this, then in many countries there's an army that the country doesn't need. And eventually that army becomes it does a rebellion, what do you call that? A military takeover. And a coup, and it takes over the country. What do you need the army for in the first place? The moment you have a standing army, you're in trouble. So the United States needs a standing army. Why? Because it's supposed to police the world. But the rest of the world doesn't need a standing army. You need an army only when you're facing conflict. When a place like China has a standing army, the world's in trouble. Because they have a completely different conception of what it means to be a human being. Completely different. They have no idea of human rights. They have no idea of inalienable rights because they have no idea of the image of God in a person. I said this about Islam also, same problem. When Islam has a standing army, the only thing you can do with it is kill people in order to convert them by the power of the sword to Islam. And we're not saying that you don't need to fight sometimes. Of course you need to. You need to defend yourself. But for that you don't need a standing army. So the Jewish king was not supposed to have a standing army. That's the technical reason why he was not allowed to have horses. The horses were like tanks. That means a standing army. Today we have tanks in the ground, and we have tanks in the air, and we have tanks in the water. All these things are examples of horses. But in those times, the image, if you said in the time with Egypt, it wasn't clear where it was. So in any case, when you said you were going to get them from the emperor that had, in the same way that today, where do you buy the tanks? You buy them in the United States. You buy them, right? That's where you buy tanks from.
I thought they came from Israel.
It's because it wants to be an emperor. One of the biggest problems that Israel has is that it has a standing army. It uses the excuse that we need to defend ourselves all the time. But it's an excuse. It's not for real.
So what's it for?
What?
So what's it for?
The standing army in Israel has no value, and it's known. The standing army can only, meaning what we call shirut chova and keva, the people that are in the army right now. So I can't say the number here because I'm not allowed to say the number. But it's well known that those numbers of the standing army can only defend for the first 24 hours. And the whole army is really built on the reserves, what's called the army that you enlist when there's a threat. And there's a thinking that within 24 hours they should be able to take over. and they're the ones who win the battle, which is how it was in every single war. It's except for the 6 Day War, because it was too quick. So the standing army did a lot more than the reserves did. But in the end, the reserves still did most of the work. But in other wars, the standing army had no meaning, because it doesn't mean anything because it's such small numbers. So in Israel, the conception is very screwed up right now. And they're constantly debating it. How big should the standing army be? As it is, it's too big. Like, even though it's very, very big, it's actually very small, because the number of actual fighting troops is very small. Everything is built on the reserves.
The main objective of the army is to
it's a melting pot.
Integrate.
Right. So that's the debate. Because they have this cultural melting pot that they like, which is to make people Israeli, as it were.
As opposed to being from.
Right. And so they have this tool, very strong tool in their hands. It costs a lot of money to keep the standing army. Not as much as it costs to keep the reserves, but it's still a substantial amount of the military budget every year. And the other option would have been to make a very, very small and very good, only fighting force, and with it like a cyber force and things that you need all the time. Cyber force you need to have all the time. You can't, but it's a very small number of people. It's not such a big deal. And most of the people that are in the standing army today would not be in the army. And so you'd have, out of however many, let's say, X number of young people that enlist forced to enlist, whatever you call it, mandatory enlistment, every year, so you would only have 30% of them actually enlist. And then 66% would go out straight to to study or whatever. And you have to minimize it, because you really don't need it. It really doesn't do a job except for the first 24 hours. And even today, even that's not needed, because there's such a strong Air Force that you don't need that. The Air Force is not standing army at all. None of them are. Almost none of them are. There's very few people in the Air Force that are actually in the standing army. Most of the people are most of the pilots, most of the jet pilots, or whatever, helicopters, they're reservists. I don't know if it's 90%, if it's 95%, or 99%, I don't know where it is, but it's very, very high. And the training period, they call that the standing army. It's not really a standing army. It's not like, they have on call 150 pilots to get into planes. They don't need to, because they can sound the alarm. Everybody has a cell phone today. The pilots are very, very committed to what they do. Within 20 minutes they're in the base, because there's bases close enough anywhere that you live in Israel that you can get into a plane in 20 minutes. They just have to prepare the plane. That's what takes the longer time. Most of the planes are ready to just jump out right now. In any case, this is a very interesting topic. This is why the Torah doesn't want there to be a standing army. And if there has to be some infrastructure, it has to be very minimal. Because the moment that you have a standing army, you create a different part of society which is based on something terrible, which is we're going to war. And that shouldn't be anybody's consciousness. Especially a Jew, you should be devoted to something entirely different. Right? You can't devote your life to this. And it becomes that you have this power in your hands and you're like some kind of elite. And the Torah doesn't want that to be the elite. It doesn't want officers and people like that and generals to be important in society. It wants the people of the book to be important in society. It wants something else. Again, it's not adverse to having an infrastructure. It just doesn't want the army to be something that's kept all year long. That's not how it wants. So what do horses? That's horses in the ancient world. That's horses as they represented today, the standing army. The horse, though, has some other capability. It takes you from one place to another very quickly. So he says in the psyche, those are letters. What does it mean that you have letters? That there are certain permutations of letters that take you into a higher realm in your mind. Like you read a certain book. It's just permutations of letters. And yet, if a book is written well, or any book that has content, it lifts your consciousness suddenly to a much higher level. That's what it's an incredible thing when you think about it. That letters in the right order can take my mind to a much higher place. How is that even possible? What that's saying is that my mind, my consciousness is built out of letters. So if you put them in the right order, I'm reading something like I'm reading now this mimer, it's lifting me to a whole new way of thinking. So that's likened to a horse. So the letters are likened to horses, because horses also take you from one place to another very quickly. If you just remember a Mishnah, and suddenly you remember the sugya around it, you're not thinking of the sugya right now. You're not thinking of all the issues that the Mishnah raises at the moment, but you just recite the Mishnah, and it all comes flowing back. And the people who are big Talmidei Chachamim, so they learn 50, 60, 70 blot pages of Gemara be'iyun every morning. How can you learn 50, 60, 70 pages in an hour or two? Most people can't even read 50, 60, 70 pages of a novel in an hour. So how can they go over this very, very intense and volumes and volumes of information? Because they've gone over it so many times that just reading the words quickly takes them up to that space. The same thing happens when you daven. You know the davening so well, and if you've learned it, if you don't understand what it means, it's something else. But if you understand what it means and you've learned what it means, the words that we say in prayer, then it transports you very quickly through the spiritual world. It just takes you, because you know where you're going. So you just read the words, and it reminds you of where you're going. Yeah, it becomes like a motto, that a short phrase. It just wakes up everything that's already in your mind. He's talking about, again, obviously somebody who learns, not just anybody. But you can't say that the words are the main point. The main point is that the person be there. So if the words are being said, there's a lot of horses here. Nobody's getting on them, and nobody's riding into the sunset or riding up. Then that's something's being missed. Okay? The whole thing is not working. So what did Hashem do during Kriyas Yamsuf? What did he do during the parting of the Red Sea? He drowned the horses. He drowned the letters. Why did he do that? Why did he drown them?
Get rid of the army, don't have to go to the moon.
No, that's not a good answer. Why did he drown them?
Why did he drown the horses?
Yeah.
To destroy the army.
But why? Why do that? Because he wants the person. He doesn't want the horse. The parting of the Red Sea.
But he killed the Egyptians.
Said that we're not talking about whether it was Egyptian horse or a Jewish horse. That's not the point. The point is that the horses were drowned. He took the horses with their riders and he threw them into that's what Kriyas Yamsuf is. It's this ability to access the super consciousness. The horse is now taking you up to a place. That's what it means that he drowned them in the sea. Okay, continue tomorrow.
But I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow yet.